The most dangerous individuals in society are not those who lurk in shadows, but those who walk comfortably in the light. They are the charming colleagues who remember birthdays, the attentive partners who anticipate needs, the empathetic friends who always have time to listen. What makes them truly formidable is not their malevolence, but their ability to cloak it in the ordinary trappings of decency. This first section peels back the layers of this disguise, revealing how predators construct and maintain their facades of normalcy through psychological sophistication and behavioral precision. The human brain is wired to seek patterns and familiarity. We are biologically predisposed to trust those who resemble us in manner, speech, or belief. This evolutionary shortcut served our ancestors well when judging potential allies in small tribal groups. But in our complex modern world, it has become a vulnerability that sophisticated manipulators exploit with clinical efficiency. The 5 strategies explored in this section, the Chameleon Effect, polite predation, feigned empathy, controlled temper, and masterful mirroring, represent the foundational tools in the psychological arsenal of dangerous individuals. These are not the crude instruments of cartoon villains, but the refined techniques of those who understand human psychology at its deepest levels. Consider the chameleon effect, where predators don't simply adapt to their environment, they become indistinguishable from it. This goes beyond basic social mimicry. Recent neuroscientific research has shown that skilled manipulators activate our mirror neuron systems more effectively than genuine individuals, creating a false sense of kinship that bypasses our rational defenses. The implications are profound. Our very neurology conspires against us when encountering these individuals. Historical cases from con artists like Ferdinand de Mara, who successfully impersonated surgeons and college professors, to modern corporate fraudsters demonstrate how complete these transformations can be. What's most unsettling is not their ability to pretend, but their capacity to believe their own performances, if only temporarily. Polite predation takes this deception a step further by weaponizing social norms themselves. In cultures worldwide, courtesy functions as social lubricant, allowing strangers to interact with minimal friction. Manipulators reverse engineer this system, using politeness not as a means of facilitating genuine connection, but as a tool for exploitation. The psychological mechanism at work here is what sociologist Irving Goffman called impression management, taken to its most calculated extreme. When researchers analyzed the behavior of convicted white-collar criminals, they found these individuals were consistently rated as more polite and agreeable than their peers prior to their exposure. Their civility wasn't just a personality trait, it was a strategic choice, maintained with the same discipline a soldier maintains their uniform. Feigned empathy represents perhaps the most insidious of these tactics because it preys on our most vulnerable moments. Unlike simple deception, which can be uncovered through fact-checking, counterfeit empathy is nearly impossible to verify in the moment. Studies in clinical psychology have shown that even trained professionals struggle to distinguish between authentic and simulated empathy in controlled settings. The difference lies not in what is said, but in what happens afterward. Authentic empathy creates connection. Feigned empathy creates dependency. This distinction becomes clear in the patterns of abusive relationships, where expressions of concern are inevitably followed by subtle manipulations. The predator's understanding of their target's pain isn't used to alleviate suffering, but to map vulnerabilities for future exploitation. The controlled temper reveals another dimension of this psychological warfare. Where primitive aggression would trigger our fight or flight response, calculated anger management activates our more sophisticated and therefore more easily manipulated social cognition. Workplace studies have demonstrated that employees report higher stress levels under managers who employ controlled hostility than under those who openly lose their temper. The uncertainty created by this behavior triggers chronic anxiety, which in turn impairs judgment and makes victims more susceptible to further manipulation. This explains why victims of psychological abuse often describe feeling crazy rather than angry, their oppressors have weaponized their own emotional regulation against them. Masterful mirroring completes this arsenal by offering the most seductive illusion of all, the soulmate fantasy. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when we encounter someone who reflects our deepest values and aspirations, our brain's reward centers light up as if we've found a missing piece of ourselves. Manipulators engineer this experience deliberately, using information gathered through careful observation to construct what psychologist Robert Hare calls a synthetic personality. The tragedy is that this artificial connection often feels more intense than genuine bonds, creating an addiction that persists even after the mask slips. The aftermath of these relationships frequently leaves victims not just heartbroken, but fundamentally doubting their own judgment, a psychological wound that can take years to heal. These 5 strategies share a common thread. They exploit the gap between our evolutionary psychology and modern social complexity. Our brains developed to navigate small, tight-knit communities where deception was difficult to maintain over time. In today's fragmented, fast-paced world, predators can maintain their facades long enough to do significant damage before moving on. Understanding these mechanisms isn't about promoting paranoia, but about developing what psychologist Daniel Goleman might call emotional surveillance, the ability to notice discrepancies between words and actions, between public persona and private behavior. The mask of normalcy works because we want to believe in it. Our social contract depends on assuming basic goodwill in others. What makes these predators so dangerous is not that they violate this contract, but that they mimic it so well. As we'll explore in subsequent sections, the true horror begins not when the mask slips, but when we realize it was never real to begin with. That what we took for genuine connection was always psychological warfare in disguise. The chapters that follow will examine how these foundational tactics combine into more complex strategies of manipulation. But always remember, every psychological predator begins by mastering the art of appearing normal. In a world where we're conditioned to equate normalcy with safety, this may be their most powerful weapon of all. The implications extend far beyond individual relationships. These patterns manifest in corporate culture, political leadership, and even societal movements. When we examine historical atrocities or modern institutional failures, we often find that the perpetrators weren't obvious monsters, but individuals who expertly manipulated societal norms and expectations. This understanding should inform everything from how we vet leaders to how we structure organizational checks and balances. As we proceed to the next section on psychological warfare, keep in mind that the strategies we've explored here are merely the groundwork. They represent the psychological equivalent of a magician's misdirection, making you look where they want you to look, so you never see what's really happening. The most effective predators understand that the best way to hide a lie isn't to conceal it, but to wrap it in just enough truth to make it indistinguishable from reality. This is why their masks aren't just convincing, they're often beautiful, and that may be the most dangerous thing about them. The most dangerous manipulations occur not through brute force, but through calculated psychological operations, so refined they bypass conscious detection entirely. These are not the crude machinations of cartoon villains, but the sophisticated strategies of those who understand human vulnerability at its most fundamental level. Where physical wounds heal with time, these invisible assaults on the psyche leave scars that reshape perception itself. Gaslighting operates as a slow erosion of reality, a gradual dismantling of one's trust in their own mind. The technique derives its name from Patrick Hamilton's 1938 play Gaslight, where a husband systematically manipulates his wife into doubting her perceptions. But modern implementations have evolved far beyond theatrical tropes. Contemporary gaslighters employ micro-denials, small, barely noticeable contradictions that accumulate into profound disorientation. A partner might insist they never made plans you distinctly remember discussing. A boss could claim you misunderstood instructions they deliberately gave vaguely. The genius of this approach lies in its deniability. Each instance seems trivial enough to dismiss as forgetfulness, yet the aggregate effect leaves victims chronically second-guessing themselves. Neuroscience reveals why this proves so devastating. When our memories are repeatedly challenged, the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, actually begins altering its recordings of events. The victim isn't simply doubting their recollection. Their neural architecture is being rewritten under psychological siege. Negging, a term originating from pickup artistry, but now prevalent across all forms of manipulation, represents a more insidious form of emotional sabotage. Unlike overt insults that trigger immediate defensiveness, negging delivers carefully calibrated microcriticisms wrapped in plausible deniability. That dress is interesting. Most people couldn't pull that off. Appears complimentary, while subtly planting self-doubt. You're surprisingly articulate for someone with your background. Smuggles condescension behind apparent praise. The psychological mechanism at work here exploits our innate negativity bias, the well-documented phenomenon where the human brain weights negative input 3 times more heavily than positive. What makes negging particularly pernicious is its drip-feed nature. Individual comments seem insignificant, but their cumulative effect systematically dismantles self-esteem while keeping the victim hooked on intermittent validation. Intermittent reinforcement operates on the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. Unpredictable rewards create obsessive behavior patterns. Psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated this phenomenon with his famous rat experiments, showing animals would press levers most frantically when rewards came randomly rather than consistently. Human manipulators apply this science with chilling precision in relationships and workplaces alike. The partner who oscillates between affection and indifference. The boss who alternates praise with unexplained coldness. These patterns trigger dopamine-driven craving cycles, far more powerful than consistent treatment could produce. Brain imaging studies reveal that intermittent rewards light up neural pathways associated with addiction, explaining why victims persist in toxic situations long after logic would dictate departure. The cruel brilliance of this tactic lies in its self-perpetuating nature. The very unpredictability that causes pain also creates the desperate hope that the next interaction might bring relief. Triangulation introduces a third party into what should be a 2-person dynamic, not through honest mediation, but as a psychological wedge. This tactic manifests when a manipulator deliberately compares you to others. My ex never complained about this. Shares confidential information to create artificial alliances. Even your friend thinks you're being unreasonable, or cultivates rivalries to maintain control. The psychological power stems from our deeply ingrained social comparison instincts, the automatic human tendency to evaluate ourselves relative to others. By controlling these comparisons, the manipulator shapes your self-perception without direct confrontation. Workplace studies show this technique frequently appears in toxic leadership, where managers pit employees against each other to prevent unified resistance. The most sophisticated practitioners employ imagined rather than real third parties, vague references to what people are saying or how others see you, creating the destabilizing effect without any actual external input required. The bait-and-switch personality constitutes one of the most psychologically destabilizing manipulations because it attacks our fundamental need for consistency in others. After presenting an idealized version of themselves, the bait, the manipulator gradually reveals their true nature, the switch, yet with just enough residual traces of their original persona to keep the victim hoping for its return. This creates cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs. Rather than accepting they've been deceived, victims often double down on efforts to recover the initial illusion, trapped in what psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy of emotional investment. The technique proves particularly effective because it exploits our brain's pattern completion tendencies. Having recognized what appears to be a coherent personality initially, we continue projecting that coherence even as contradictory behaviors emerge. These psychological warfare tactics share a common thread. They exploit fundamental operating systems of human cognition and emotion. Where physical coercion meets resistance, these invisible manipulations bypass our defenses by hijacking the very mechanisms designed for social bonding and self-preservation. The greatest danger lies not in their initial impact, but in their ability to rewrite victims' neural pathways over time, creating psychological dependencies that outlast the relationships themselves. Understanding these strategies provides not just protection, but a roadmap to reclaiming autonomy in a world where the most damaging weapons leave no visible marks. The silent war for control of the mind continues daily in homes, workplaces, and institutions. Its battlefields are private conversations and subtle glances rather than overt confrontations. Its weapons are words and implications rather than fists. And its casualties often don't realize they've been wounded until the damage has already reshaped their sense of self. This is psychological warfare in its most advanced form: invisible, deniable, and devastatingly effective. The most dangerous social manipulators never appear to be pulling strings. They operate from the shadows, turning relationships into weapons and social connections into minefields. Unlike physical confrontations that leave visible wounds, social sabotage works through whispers, omissions, and carefully engineered misunderstandings. The damage occurs so gradually that by the time you recognize the pattern, your reputation may be irreparably harmed, your relationships poisoned, and your trust in others shattered. The invisible puppeteer operates through indirect control, making others act on their behalf while maintaining perfect deniability. This technique mirrors the psychological concept of agency diffusion, where harmful actions feel less consequential when performed at someone else's suggestion. A workplace manipulator might plant ideas in a colleague's ear during casual conversation, then watch as that colleague passionately advocates for them in meetings. The genius of this approach lies in its reversibility. If the idea succeeds, the puppeteer claims credit. If it fails, they can step back untouched. Studies of organizational behavior reveal these individuals often rise to middle management, powerful enough to influence outcomes, but sufficiently removed to avoid accountability. Their true skill isn't in direct persuasion, but in understanding group dynamics well enough to nudge people toward desired actions while letting them believe the decisions were their own. Reputation assassination occurs not through overt slander, but through the strategic use of plausible deniability and concern trolling. The modern reputation killer doesn't declare John is incompetent. They say, "I worry about John sometimes. He seems so overwhelmed lately," with just enough sincerity to avoid detection. This approach exploits what psychologists call the illusory truth effect, where repeated exposure to a suggestion increases its perceived validity, regardless of evidence. The real damage occurs through pattern building, a series of small, seemingly innocent comments that collectively form a damaging narrative. Research shows it takes approximately 5 positive interactions to overcome the impact of one negative impression, giving the saboteur a mathematical advantage. The most skilled practitioners alternate between subtle criticism and warm support, creating confusion that makes their occasional barbs seem like well-intentioned honesty rather than calculated attacks. The silent treatment, when weaponized, becomes a form of psychological starvation. Humans are social creatures. Our brains literally interpret social rejection as physical pain through identical neural pathways. Functional MRI scans show that experiencing the silent treatment activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that processes physical injury. Manipulators exploit this biological vulnerability by alternating between affection and withdrawal, creating what psychologists term intermittent reinforcement. The victim's desperate attempts to restore connection actually reinforce the manipulator's control, much like a lab animal compulsively pressing a lever for unpredictable rewards. What makes this tactic particularly cruel is its self-perpetuating nature. The longer it continues, the more the victim's anxious behaviors can be framed as justification for further rejection. In workplace settings, this often manifests as ghosting, deliberately excluding someone from communications or meetings while maintaining polite, superficial interactions when forced. The fake confidant plays a dangerous double game, presenting themselves as a trusted repository for secrets while revealing nothing genuine in return. This asymmetrical vulnerability creates what intelligence agencies call an information imbalance. The manipulator accumulates compromising material while remaining opaque themselves. Psychological research demonstrates that sharing personal information triggers oxytocin release, creating bonding feelings that the fake confidant expertly mimics without reciprocating. They master the art of vague booking, sharing just enough superficial personal detail to appear open while revealing nothing substantive. Over time, this one-way transparency gives them increasing power as they accumulate sensitive information that can be deployed strategically. The most sophisticated operators will occasionally sacrifice minor secrets to maintain the illusion of reciprocity, much like a card shark intentionally losing small hands to build confidence before taking everything. The controlled rumor mill operates through what sociologists call plausible deniability chains. Instead of spreading damaging information directly, the manipulator plants seeds with carefully chosen intermediaries who believe they're sharing original observations. Have you noticed how Sarah always leaves early on Fridays? Becomes, people are saying Sarah isn't committed to her job after passing through 2 or 3 mouths. This technique exploits 2 psychological phenomena: the telephone effect, where messages mutate with repetition, and source amnesia, where we remember information but forget its origin. By the time the rumor reaches its target, it appears to have emerged organically from multiple sources, making the original manipulator untraceable. Organizational studies show this tactic thrives in environments with poor communication channels, where information gaps allow rumors to flourish unchecked. These social sabotage techniques share a common thread. They all exploit the gap between appearance and reality in human relationships. Where direct confrontation would trigger resistance, these methods bypass our defenses by operating through third parties, exploiting social norms, and weaponizing the very trust that holds groups together. The puppeteer uses others as proxies. The reputation assassin hides behind concern. The silent tormentor exploits our need for connection. The fake confidant perverts vulnerability, and the rumor mill operator disappears into the crowd. The cumulative effect creates what psychologists call social uncertainty, a chronic state of anxiety about one's place in the group that impairs judgment and decision-making. Victims often respond with increasingly desperate attempts to regain footing, which the manipulator can then frame as proof of instability. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where the victim's attempts to defend themselves actually feed the narrative being used against them. Protection begins with recognizing these patterns not as isolated incidents, but as interconnected strategies in a larger psychological arsenal. The invisible puppeteer relies on others' willingness to be led. The reputation assassin depends on our tendency to believe repeated suggestions. The silent treatment works because we're wired to seek connection. The fake confidant exploits our natural reciprocity instincts, and the rumor mill thrives on our cognitive laziness in tracking information sources. Understanding these mechanisms provides more than just defense. It offers a way to reclaim agency in social spaces. By identifying the underlying patterns, we can begin to see through the illusions, separate the manipulators from the genuinely well-intentioned, and most importantly, protect ourselves from tactics designed to operate below conscious awareness. In a world where social capital increasingly determines opportunity, These insights become essential tools for maintaining both psychological well-being and professional integrity. The most effective social sabotage leaves no fingerprints, only a trail of damaged relationships and self-doubt. But with careful observation and a willingness to trust consistent actions over shifting words, the invisible strings begin to reveal themselves, and once seen, they can be cut. Human relationships should be built on mutual respect and voluntary exchange. Yet some individuals engineer interactions to systematically extract value while giving little in return. These exploitation strategies don't announce themselves with dramatic confrontations, but rather through gradual calculated maneuvers that reshape ordinary transactions into instruments of control. The most effective practitioners understand that overt domination creates resistance, while subtle indebtedness fosters compliance. The illusion of indebtedness operates on a simple psychological principle. People feel compelled to repay favors, even those they never requested. This explains why certain individuals make a show of performing unasked-for kindnesses, the extravagant gift that arrives unexpectedly, the unsolicited career advice delivered with theatrical concern, the dramatic public defense against some slight you hadn't even noticed. These aren't genuine acts of generosity, but psychological contracts written in invisible ink. Neuroscience research demonstrates that unreciprocated favors create measurable discomfort in the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that processes social rejection. The exploiter deliberately induces this discomfort, then positions themselves as the only one who can relieve it through compliance with their unstated demands. Over time, this creates an escalating cycle where each favor further tightens the psychological leash. Choice architecture represents one of the most sophisticated control mechanisms. Rather than issuing commands, skilled manipulators design environments that funnel decisions toward their preferred outcomes while maintaining the illusion of autonomy. A manager might ask, "Would you prefer to handle the Thompson project or the Wilson account?" omitting the third option of not taking on additional work. A partner might frame arguments as, "We could go to my parents this weekend," or "We could disappoint them," subtly eliminating alternatives. The psychological power stems from how our brains process decisions. We evaluate options relative to what's presented, not what's possible. Studies in behavioral economics confirm that people will frequently choose between artificial binaries rather than questioning the framework itself. The most dangerous practitioners of this technique layer it with pseudo-generosity. "I'm giving you options," making resistance appear unreasonable. Emotional parasites specialize in draining energy while providing just enough nourishment to keep their hosts from breaking free. Unlike traditional abusive relationships with clear aggressors and victims, parasitic dynamics create a fog of mutual exhaustion that obscures who's harming whom. The partner who's perpetually in crisis yet refuses help. The friend who demands hours of your time but disappears when you need support. The colleague who constantly brainstorms ideas that become your workload. All follow the same playbook. They exploit the human tendency toward loss aversion, will work harder to avoid losing what we've invested than to gain something new. Psychological studies of these relationships show a consistent pattern. The parasite induces small, regular investments of time and emotion that seem insignificant individually, but cumulatively drain the victim's resources. The genius of this approach lies in its deniability. Any single instance appears harmless, making the victim seem unreasonable for protesting what looks like normal give and take. The Trojan horse favor arrives wrapped in the guise of generosity, but contains hidden obligations. Where normal favors create temporary proportional indebtedness, these engineered kindnesses come with invisible strings that can be pulled at will. The coworker who insists on covering your shift when you never asked, the relative who gives extravagant gifts, then makes unreasonable demands, the mentor who provides career assistance, then expects personal loyalty. all understand the psychological power of manufactured obligation. Research in social psychology confirms that the more disproportionate the initial favor, the more powerful the subsequent control. The recipient experiences what's termed obligation anxiety, a persistent low-grade worry about when and how the debt will be called in. This anticipatory stress often proves more psychologically costly than simply performing the eventual demanded favor itself. Bureaucratic bullies weaponize systems and procedures to control others while maintaining perfect plausible deniability. They understand that organizational rules provide both shield and sword, protection from accountability while enabling precise punishment. The professor who uses obscure grading rubrics to punish dissent, the HR manager who interprets policies only when convenient, the government clerk who makes endless requests for additional documentation, all follow the same playbook. Their power stems from asymmetrical rule mastery. They know the system well enough to navigate its exceptions, while ensuring others remain trapped by its defaults. Organizational behavior studies show these individuals thrive in environments where procedures are complex enough to provide manipulation opportunities, but not so clearly defined as to prevent arbitrary enforcement. The most dangerous bureaucratic bullies combine this with performative regret. I wish I could help, but these rules, transforming their aggression into apparent helplessness. These exploitation strategies share a common foundation. They all distort natural human reciprocity into engineered dependence. The manufactured debt perverts our innate sense of fairness. The illusion of choice hijacks our decision-making processes. The parasitic relationship exploits our capacity for empathy. The Trojan favor abuses our gratitude instincts. And the bureaucratic bully weaponizes our respect for authority. Each method proves devastatingly effective because it doesn't fight human nature, but rather redirects it toward the manipulator's ends. The cumulative effect creates what psychologists term learned helplessness, the gradual conviction that effort makes no difference to outcomes. Victims stop resisting not because they can't, but because they've been conditioned to believe resistance is futile. This psychological surrender often outlasts the actual relationship, influencing future interactions in ways the original manipulator never witnesses. Recognizing these patterns requires looking beyond individual incidents to systemic behaviors. The manufactured debtor always keeps an invisible ledger. The choice architect consistently eliminates alternatives. The emotional parasite maintains a one-way energy flow. The Trojan gift giver follows generosity with expectation. The bureaucratic bully enforces rules selectively. Seen in isolation, each instance might be excused. Observed as patterns, their true nature becomes undeniable. True protection begins with understanding that healthy relationships don't operate through hidden debts or constrained choices. Normal favors don't come with unstated expectations. Genuine help doesn't create lingering anxiety, and fair systems don't require special knowledge to navigate. By recalibrating our expectations to these baselines, we develop the discernment to distinguish manipulation from ordinary human imperfection. The ultimate irony of these control strategies lies in their fragility when exposed to sunlight. The illusion of debt dissolves when examined. The constrained choice expands when challenged. The parasitic bond breaks when the energy flow reverses. The Trojan favor's payload becomes harmless when anticipated, and the bureaucratic bully loses power when their arbitrary enforcement is documented. What makes them effective isn't their inherent strength, but their ability to operate undetected in the shadows of social norms and psychological blind spots. In a world that increasingly measures relationships in transactional terms, these insights become essential armor. They allow us to participate in healthy exchanges while recognizing when reciprocity becomes exploitation, when choice becomes theater, and when systems become weapons. Most importantly, they restore our ability to distinguish between genuine connection and carefully engineered control, a skill that becomes increasingly valuable as the lines between them grow ever more deliberately blurred. The most effective controllers understand that people will fight against visible chains, but often adjust to invisible ones. By making the invisible visible, we reclaim not just our autonomy, but our capacity for truly voluntary relationships built on authentic exchange rather than psychological coercion. This represents more than personal protection. It's a reclamation of the fundamental human right to engage with others freely, without hidden debts or unspoken obligations distorting every interaction. Behind every act of manipulation lies a particular way of seeing the world, a mindset that transforms ordinary human interactions into opportunities for exploitation. This worldview doesn't develop overnight, but rather evolves through patterns of thinking that gradually distort reality to serve selfish ends. Understanding this dark mindset provides more than just insight into manipulators. It offers a crucial lens for recognizing potential predators before their behaviors fully manifest. The zero-sum mentality represents one of the most destructive cognitive frameworks in human relationships. For those who adopt this perspective, every interaction becomes a battle where one person's gain must equal another's loss. This explains why certain individuals react to others' successes with visible discomfort, not because they've been harmed, but because they perceive any advancement, not their own, as a personal setback. Psychological research reveals this mindset often originates in environments where resources were genuinely scarce or love was conditional during formative years. The tragedy lies in how this early adaptation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. By treating all relationships as competitive, these individuals create the very antagonism they fear. Workplace studies show zero-sum thinkers consistently underestimate the potential for mutually beneficial outcomes, preferring to sabotage potential wins they can't personally claim, rather than risk someone else gaining what they perceive as relative advantage. Schadenfreude, the experience of pleasure at another's misfortune, operates as emotional fuel for particularly toxic personalities. Where healthy individuals experience discomfort witnessing others' pain, these individuals derive energy and satisfaction from it. Neuroscience studies using functional MRI scans reveal disturbing differences in brain activity. When most people see someone in distress, their mirror neuron systems activate to simulate that experience, while those high in dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, show increased activity in reward centers. This isn't simply the absence of empathy, but an active reversal of normal human response patterns. The most dangerous manifestation occurs when these individuals engineer others' failures, not for personal gain, but purely for the satisfaction of watching the downfall. This explains the otherwise puzzling behavior of those who sabotage relationships or careers even when doing so provides no material benefit. The emotional payoff alone justifies their actions. The chessboard view of humanity reduces complex individuals to mere pieces in the manipulator's personal game. This dehumanizing perspective allows for behaviors that would otherwise trigger guilt or hesitation. Psychological profiling of convicted white-collar criminals reveals this pattern consistently. Victims become marks, colleagues become pawns, and friends become useful idiots in their internal narratives. The cognitive distortion lies in the complete dismissal of others' interiority, the inability to conceive that other people have rich inner lives, personal motivations, and emotional depths equal to one's own. Organizational behavior research demonstrates how this mindset escalates. What begins as simple opportunism often grows into systematic exploitation as the manipulator becomes increasingly adept at identifying and utilizing human resources. The most chilling aspect emerges in therapeutic settings, where some individuals can articulate this worldview with complete calm, demonstrating not just understanding of its abnormality, but pride in their realism. Emotional residue, the lingering feelings that persist after our actions affect others, serves as humanity's moral compass. Its absence creates individuals capable of harm without hesitation or regret. Psychological studies distinguish between primary emotions, immediate responses, and secondary emotions, reflective feelings about those responses. Most people experience guilt, shame, or remorse after hurting others, even unintentionally. Those lacking emotional residue may understand these concepts intellectually, but describe experiencing them as abstract social conventions rather than visceral realities. Brain scan studies show decreased activity in the anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex, regions associated with emotional processing, when these individuals consider harmful actions. This explains how some people can systematically damage others while maintaining perfect or calm, or offer textbook perfect apologies they clearly don't feel. The danger lies not in their inability to recognize right from wrong, but in their capacity to know the difference, yet remain unmoved by it. The infinite justification loop represents the mental machinery that keeps dark behaviors running without psychological friction. Every harmful act generates its own airtight rationale, creating a self-perpetuating system immune to external feedback. Cognitive behavioral research identifies several hallmarks of this pattern. The overestimation of personal grievances. They deserved it. The minimization of consequences. It wasn't that bad. And the externalization of blame. They made me do it. What makes this particularly insidious is its adaptability when confronted with irrefutable evidence challenging one justification. The individual simply pivots to another without ever addressing the core issue. Studies of repeat offenders show this pattern intensifying over time, with justifications becoming increasingly elaborate and divorced from reality. The end result is a personality that can commit virtually any act while maintaining unwavering self-regard, not through conscious deception, but through a lifetime's practice of reflexive self-exoneration. These cognitive patterns collectively create what psychologists term malignant self-love, a pathological form of self-regard that requires constant validation through domination. Unlike healthy confidence that stems from genuine accomplishment, this version remains perpetually fragile, demanding ever new proofs of superiority. The tragedy lies in its self-perpetuating nature. Each act of exploitation further isolates the individual from authentic connection, which in turn increases their reliance on manipulative strategies to meet emotional needs. The societal implications are profound. These mindsets don't exist in isolation, but interact with cultural values and institutional structures. Environments that reward ruthless competition, glorify unconstrained ambition, or prioritize results over process actively nurture these cognitive distortions. Historical analysis reveals how entire societies can gradually adopt zero-sum thinking during times of scarcity, or how bureaucratic systems can encourage chessboard perspectives by reducing individuals to case numbers. Recognizing these patterns provides more than personal protection. It offers a framework for understanding many otherwise inexplicable behaviors. The colleague who sabotages team projects for personal credit, the partner who takes pleasure in subtle humiliations, the leader who treats followers as disposable tools. All become comprehensible when viewed through this lens. More importantly, they become predictable, allowing for proactive defense rather than reactive damage control. Psychological research offers cautious hope. While these mindsets prove remarkably resistant to change in adulthood, their early precursors can be identified and addressed. Educational systems that emphasize perspective-taking, emotional literacy, and cooperative problem-solving may inoculate against their development. For those already entrenched in these patterns, cognitive remediation approaches that target specific distortions, like the overestimation of personal grievance, show promise in reducing harmful behaviors, if not fundamentally altering personality structure. Ultimately, understanding the dark mindset serves two vital functions. First, it demystifies predatory behavior, revealing the often petty psychological mechanisms behind what victims experience as profoundly destructive acts. Second, it provides a safeguard against adopting these patterns ourselves during times of stress or trauma. A reminder that the line between understandable coping strategy and pathological mindset can sometimes be thinner than we'd like to believe. In a world that increasingly rewards self-interest and celebrates ruthless efficiency, these insights become essential navigational tools. They allow us to distinguish between healthy ambition and pathological exploitation, between justified self-care and malignant narcissism. Most importantly, they help preserve our capacity for genuine human connection in environments that increasingly encourage us to view each other as means rather than ends. The dark mindset flourishes in the space between what we know about human nature and what we're willing to acknowledge in daily life. By bringing these patterns into clear view, we not only protect ourselves from predators, but also reaffirm our commitment to building relationships based on mutual recognition of our shared humanity, with all its complexities, contradictions, and capacity for both harm and healing. The most dangerous individuals understand that survival depends not just on effective manipulation, but on avoiding detection altogether. They master the subtle arts of misdirection, crafting personas and strategies designed to slip beneath the radar of suspicion. These techniques transform what should be visible red flags into ordinary-seeming behaviors, allowing patterns of exploitation to continue uninterrupted for years or even decades. The controlled outburst represents a perfect example of how predators weaponize emotion while maintaining plausible deniability. Unlike genuine anger that erupts spontaneously, these calculated displays follow a predictable script, intense enough to intimidate, but brief enough to deny, dramatic enough to be memorable, but vague enough to avoid concrete accusations. Psychological research into workplace bullying reveals how these staged explosions serve multiple purposes. They establish dominance, test boundaries, and create an environment of walking on eggshells anxiety, all while allowing the perpetrator to later claim they were just passionate or having a bad day. The key insight lies in the aftermath. Where authentic anger leads to remorse and repair, controlled outbursts never quite cross lines that would require meaningful accountability. Victims often find themselves doubting whether the incident was bad enough to warrant confrontation, while bystanders dismiss it as a personality quirk rather than a deliberate strategy. Disposable alibis operate as psychological smoke bombs, creating just enough confusion to prevent clear attribution of responsibility. The sophisticated manipulator doesn't simply lie. They construct entire parallel narratives with carefully placed kernels of truth that make their stories resistant to fact-checking. A cheating partner might mention having lunch near their affair location weeks earlier, then later reference that remembered detail to explain their presence in the area. A dishonest employee could deliberately create ambiguous documentation that technically supports their false claims. This tactic exploits what cognitive scientists call source monitoring error, the brain's difficulty in separating actual memories from plausible reconstructions. Over time, the manipulator develops an extensive library of these half-truths, allowing them to adapt their cover stories to nearly any situation while maintaining just enough consistency to appear credible. The most dangerous practitioners go further, intentionally creating witnesses, casually mentioning plans to multiple people to establish social proof, even when those plans never materialize as described. The phantom victim represents one of the most effective reversal strategies in the psychological predator's playbook. By positioning themselves as the injured party, they preemptively disarm criticism and recruit allies against their actual victims. This goes beyond simple playing the victim. It's a comprehensive rewriting of narratives where aggression becomes self-defense, cruelty becomes misunderstood sensitivity, and legitimate complaints become persecution. Psychological studies of family systems show how this dynamic creates identified patients, where the true source of dysfunction successfully labels another family member as the problem. The tactic works because it taps into fundamental human impulses to protect the perceived underdog and avoid blaming victims. Skilled manipulators amplify this effect through strategic vulnerability, sharing carefully edited, painful experiences that elicit protective instincts while obscuring their own harmful behaviors. The genius lies in how it flips the burden of proof. Where normally the accuser must provide evidence, the phantom victim makes others feel obligated to disprove their suffering. Boredom shielding serves as an underappreciated but highly effective defense mechanism. Predators instinctively avoid sustained, in-depth scrutiny by making themselves appear uninteresting targets for investigation. This manifests in multiple ways, giving vague, rambling answers to probing questions, steering conversations toward mundane topics when uncomfortable subjects arise, cultivating an image of such utter conventionality that the idea of hidden depths seems laughable. Psychological profiling reveals that many successful con artists deliberately adopt bland, forgettable personas, the kind that blend into the background rather than attracting attention. This strategy exploits what investigators call attentional fatigue, the natural human tendency to focus limited mental energy on what appears most immediately important or interesting. By presenting as utterly ordinary in every observable way, these individuals escape the deeper inspection that might reveal their inconsistencies. Workplace studies show that the most successful workplace manipulators are rarely the most flamboyant or memorable employees, but rather those who maintain just enough competence to avoid notice while systematically undermining others. Exit strategies separate the amateur manipulators from the true professionals. Where less sophisticated individuals get caught in their own webs, the most dangerous predators plan their departures with military precision. They begin laying groundwork long before any crisis emerges, slowly distancing themselves from projects, cultivating alternative explanations for future failures, and carefully documenting or fabricating evidence that supports their preferred narrative. Organizational behavior research shows these individuals follow predictable patterns. They're often the first to identify looming problems while doing nothing to solve them, the most vocal about potential risks while avoiding personal responsibility, and the quickest to position themselves as innocent bystanders when things collapse. The psychological brilliance lies in their timing. They exit not when suspicion peaks, but just before, leaving others holding the bag while they move on unscathed. Romantic manipulators employ similar strategies, gradually engineering breakups that leave partners blaming themselves, or orchestrating dramatic departures that position them as the wronged party regardless of actual circumstances. These avoidance strategies share common psychological foundations. They all exploit cognitive biases, the mental shortcuts and blind spots that shape human perception. The controlled outburst leverages our tendency to excuse heat-of-the-moment behaviors. Disposable alibis exploit our memory's reconstructive nature. The phantom victim taps into our protective instincts. Boredom shielding takes advantage of our limited attention spans. Exit strategies utilize our preference for closure over messy confrontation. Together, they form a comprehensive system for evading consequences while continuing harmful behaviors. The societal implications are profound. These tactics don't just operate in personal relationships. They scale up to corporate and political environments where the stakes are higher and the potential for damage greater. Historical analysis of political scandals and corporate collapses often reveals these same patterns playing out on larger stages with the same results. The perpetrators escaping while others bear the consequences. Protection begins with pattern recognition. The controlled outburst follows predictable cycles rather than genuine emotional triggers. Disposable alibis rely on just two perfect coincidences. The phantom victim's suffering always seems to emerge at suspiciously convenient moments. Boredom shielding creates an unnatural flatness where complexity should exist. Exit strategies become visible when examined in reverse chronology. The careful preparation becomes obvious when you know where to look. Psychological research suggests several defensive strategies. Slowing down interactions prevents being rushed past warning signs. Documenting incidents creates objective records resistant to gaslighting. Seeking diverse perspectives helps counter manipulators' narrative control. Most importantly, trusting persistent unease, that gut feeling that something isn't quite right, often proves more reliable than all the plausible explanations in the world. These avoidance tactics ultimately represent a form of psychological camouflage, adapting ancient survival strategies to modern social environments. Where animals evolve colors and patterns to blend into physical backgrounds, psychological predators develop behaviors that blend into social expectations. The controlled outburst hides among normal human imperfections. Disposable alibis mimic ordinary faulty memories. The phantom victim resembles genuine suffering. Boredom shielding looks like simple dullness. Exit strategies appear as natural transitions. The challenge and the solution lies in looking deeper than surface appearances. By understanding these patterns, not as isolated behaviors, but as interconnected systems, we develop the discernment to see through the camouflage. What appears as a spontaneous angry moment reveals itself as part of a larger cycle. What seems like forgetfulness shows its pattern of convenience. What presents as vulnerability demonstrates its strategic timing. In a world that increasingly rewards surface performance over substance, these insights become essential tools for navigating relationships of all kinds. They allow us to distinguish between genuine human flaws and calculated manipulation, between real victims and phantom ones, between ordinary exits and engineered escapes. Most importantly, they help restore our trust in our own perceptions, the first casualty of any successful psychological manipulation. The ultimate irony lies in how these elaborate avoidance strategies contain their own vulnerabilities. The controlled outburst reveals its artificiality through its predictable timing. Disposable alibis collapse under chronological examination. The phantom victim's story changes when removed from sympathetic audiences. Boredom shielding fails against patient, methodical investigation. Exit strategies leave behind paper trails visible in retrospect. By studying these patterns, we reclaim power from those who would manipulate while avoiding responsibility. We learn to see not just what psychological predators want us to see, but what they desperately hope we'll overlook: the spaces between their words, the inconsistencies in their timelines, the discrepancies between their public faces and private actions. In the end, the art of invisibility depends entirely on others not knowing what to look for. Once you understand the tricks, the magician's act loses its power, and the predator's camouflage becomes just another costume waiting to be seen through.